So welcome everybody, Samantha Reese from the Australian Apartment Advocacy. We actually saw Helen and her company Eco Guardians recently doing some great things in Melbourne. And so I said to Helen, we need to do a Zoom event so we can kind of like talk about this. And we've actually got Lee DeCastro in the group with us today, Helen, and she's been championing a whole range of environmental initiatives with apartments in Perth, which has been great. And she actually watched my Sydney Water recent event and then managed to go into the Water Corporation and get them going as well, which was
wow.
pretty good.
And congratulations, Samantha, on your recent. I saw it as well online. So you're a rock star.
Oh, well, everybody has to do their bit, don't they? And if they do their bit, then hopefully you get some kind of change process. So what I'm going to do just quickly is kind of like run through a couple of slides in case obviously Lee does know who we are. I'm pretty sure Christine does as well. But we are obviously representing the 2.5 million people in Australia who choose to call apartments home. And education is one of the things that we do, and hence why we have Helen on our screens today. Obviously, we advocate for better consumer protection, we mediate and we do research. And what we ultimately want to have is a community who live in apartments with complete confidence. And that means that they can feel safe, that they are able to do what they want to do, and that they have a great building and a great community around them. We're known to be trailblazers, tenacious, passionate. We offer best practice, and we're all about empowerment. And that's why when we saw what Helen and her team were doing, we thought that is exactly our kind of cup of tea. And so we actually did make a phone call and catch up with Helen, and hence why we are here. So Helen, I'm not going to kind of like do any further ado. I'm going to hand it across to you and let you take us on from here.
Great. Thanks, Samantha, to you and to everyone that hopefully will tune into this later on. But I guess I'd like to start by recognising the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. I'm in Melbourne with the people of the Bunurong, and invite you to consider the traditional owners of wherever you may be today as well. So I kind of think, as I was putting this together, and it's a bit of a corporate pack, but I think where I'd like to start, and this is probably jumping you around a little bit in terms of how I've put the pack together. I'd like to start talking about the food waste challenge, and relate that particularly to the high-rise apartment complex. So if you can shoot ahead a couple of slides. And I also, in terms of the technology piece, I also had a beautiful backdrop created, but I couldn't get that to work either. So you're unfortunately seeing the naked back of my door in my office, and I couldn't even get my flowers to elevate. So just imagine me in a sea of green, which is where I often am very comfortable. So maybe so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the challenge, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about who Eco Guardians are and where we are. So maybe just the next slide.
Yes,
yeah,
sure.
This is where we're going to start.
No
so
worries.
The challenge. So the stats are pretty astounding in terms of food waste itself. So currently 40% of food production, and that's globally, goes to landfill, which is pretty horrific number. And what that equates to in Australian terms is 2.5 million tonnes of food waste per year. And that's on average 4 kilograms of waste per household per week. And how that relates to apartments. So in terms of apartment and high-rise living, 45% of waste from high-rise is made up of organic waste. Now, we're very familiar, I'm sure, like there's a lot of councils around Australia currently that are introducing FOGO and curbside collection for organics and food waste. But there's a lot of specific challenges associated with trying to bring that to the residential apartment scenario. Just not the systems or the space to be able to accommodate to be able to accommodate that at a residential apartment in a residential apartment scenario. So we've got to really look to other mechanisms for that. And just in terms of the food waste, and one of the other compelling parts of that is when it's not just the fact that the food waste goes to landfill, it's what happens when it gets there. It breaks down, and it actually contributes, food waste contributes towards 8% of our global greenhouse gas emissions, which is another kind of astounding stat. So there's a lot of challenges around food waste, and there's no question that in terms of how we approach it, reduction needs to be a huge part of that. How do we produce less food, and how do we distribute that? Because there's not a lot of equity always in how that food is actually distributed. We know that there's famine in some parts, that in some places, and just in our own society there are many residents who are just not getting the nutritional food that they require. So how can we distribute it better, and how can we reduce the amount of food that's being produced? But where Eco Guardians sits in this conversation is about food waste recycling. So we've got a solution, and our whole purpose and objective is to divert as much food waste from landfill as possible. And even, the majority of food waste happens with the consumers, but there's a lot that happens in production of food as well. And for us, we're trying to kind of, I guess, service both, where a lot of our solutions are targeted at industrial food producers and anybody who's got large scale commercial kitchens. And retail as well. So that's kind of a lot of our focus. But the other part of our business is focused on solutions for apartment complexes that can't access the FOGO waste systems that are being introduced. So our whole purpose is to reduce the amount of food waste going to landfill. And if you go sort of back, and I'm afraid I have reversed the order of these in the thinking. So if you go back to just two previous slides, this one. So this just tells you, about our mission, and we're really trying to achieve our mission and purpose through the provision of environmental solutions, to multiple industries. We also recognise the Sustainable Development Goals, which may, many of your members may not know about, but these are sort of becoming the global standards, and these have been introduced by the United Nations, and these are sort of becoming the global standards in terms of goals and targets that many businesses are trying to contribute towards the solution and reduce, in our case, it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions across and helping impact responsible consumption and production, the life of the land and helping the land be healthier, because the output we produce from our system actually goes back into the land as a healthy, nutritious fertilizer. And then we're trying to support the UN Sustainable Development Goals in a couple of other areas as well. So just on to then, who Eco Guardians is on the next slide. So we're a business, we've been around for more than 10 years. We're a leader in this space. We've got vast knowledge of food waste reduction and recycling. And we've got many large clients across Australia. So we've got about, in terms of our soil food system, which we talk about, we've got about 100 units operable across Australia. And many of those big clients include Westfield and the Westfield shopping centres, the MCG, Fraser's Property, and even the Western Australian context, we've got a lot of remote mining sites who food waste reduction is really important to them. So lots of clients, 10 years plus of history. And we've actually recently, we're really proud of this, we've recently signed, so Australia has a very active food waste a cohort that are trying to stop food waste from landfill. And we've recently signed up to the Australian Stop Food Waste Pact. So we're really proud of that piece.
Right.
So in terms of our solution that we're sort of talking about tonight, there's different parts to this, and we do also have a reduction component as part of our solution. So we have a little AI tool called Kitro. It's a really helpful piece of technology that can be mounted atop a rubbish bin, and it captures all the food waste. It sorts the food waste into edible and non-edibles, and it gives you a breakdown of what that food waste is, and it weighs it, so you can start to get a sense of the volume of waste. And that's a system that's used in lots of retailers, restaurant chains, and others, where they're just trying to not only have a really good system for taking away the waste, but thinking about from a procurement perspective what they could reduce in terms of ordering, and just also giving an idea of if there's edibles, could they be also could there be food rescue businesses that come in and help with that part of the process, that part of the life cycle of the food as well. So reuse and repurpose the food. So that's one part of our sort of technology. And then the other part, which we have received a lot of publicity around lately, is on our little soil food system. And you can see a little image of it there. So it's a unit that, and this is specifically our dehydrator unit, and it can process from 30 kilos to 2,000 kilos, depending on the size of the unit, in an 8 to 10 hour process. So if you compare that to composting, which takes weeks, it's a very quick and easy solution to reduce the food waste and also produce a really healthy soil nutritional output that we call our soil food fertilizer. It all becomes a little confusing when we keep talking about our soil foods, but there's sort of a cycle of products that sit within our whole soil food solution. So if you just want to go to the next slide, and there's a terrific image there down on the left, actually, of the one of the units in situ at the City of Melbourne. And what this little unit does in terms of the processing system, it's a dehydrator. So it removes the moisture content, or up to 85% of the moisture content of the food. It heats it to 102 degrees for about 8 to 10 hours. It shreds the matter down as well. And what comes out is quite a small particle, a bit similar to kind of coffee granules, but you do get some other contaminants in there as well. And some of even the organics won't break down completely in this process, like corn cobs and avocado pips. And, what comes out, of course, depends a little bit on what goes in. So, in this scenario, what goes in is a little compostable bag that's with your food waste. So it's like the FOGO system in the sense that you get a little caddy, you put your kitchen scraps and your food waste in there, and then you bring it down to the system and pop the bag in. But it's a very, very easy system to use. And each in this scenario, each apartment actually gets its own password or fob. So you just come down, tap it, open a little door and pop it in, and away you go. A really, really simple system. Now, the system, it does have some outputs as well that have to be considered. So because it's removing moisture, there's a lot of water that comes out. So it's connected either to a grey water system or, some other drainage system. And it does need 3-phased power to operate as well. It's heating the material, but because it's heating the material, it's heating it at quite a high temperature over a long period of time. It's actually really almost kind of pasteurizing that material, removing contaminants, so that what's actually produced, and I haven't got a particularly good image of the soil food itself, but it's safe to use, well balanced from an NPK value, which is the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And that's to be, you can distribute that on community gardens around an apartment complex, or there's some others that, who are producing it. And in the City of Melbourne context, the output that can't be used on the community gardens, the intention is to use that on the parks and gardens within the City of Melbourne itself.
That's good.
Yeah.
And what size is that? So that unit, that unit in the picture, how many apartments would that be servicing?
Yeah, so these units are best in a complex of probably more than 400 apartments and above.
Yeah, right.
So this is producing or sorry, processing. So it's running daily, and it's processing in this. I think it's almost 100 apartments that the food's been processed through this. So there's about a 70%, I think, participation rate in this apartment complex, and to date, we've diverted more than 2 tons of food waste from landfill, and the trial's been going now since Christmas.
Yeah.
So that's pretty impressive, and I guess the other really interesting part of this. So some of the data that has previously been available to indicate, how much food waste per household. In apartment living, it's often a little bit less than traditional households, because very often the apartments are located, and particularly in this scenario, they're located in the CBD, so there's access to lots of restaurants and amenities. Some people live in them part-time. There are students that often live in them as well, but there's all sorts of reasons why there may be a reduction. But in the Spring Street city complex, the apartments, there's 1, 2, 3, and some 4-bedroom apartments as well.
So you've got families.
So you've got families living there also.
Yeah.
And because we have been able to program each apartment gets its own fob and its own password, we're actually capturing the data on what each apartment is actually processing daily.
Which is awesome, because then you can break it down as to what you might anticipate if you actually are a family versus a 1 or 2 person house.
Exactly. Yeah. And the data is really helpful to update just the city's data as well, and actually provide them a lot more information on how they're going to tackle this going forward. Because I think in the city of Melbourne itself, there are about, I think, more than 400 high-rise apartment buildings. So within the metropolitan, in metropolitan Melbourne, and that's a lot. It's about 65,000 residents that we're talking about.
It'd be very hard to find a complex where there's 400 apartments or more, but it could be done in a precinct, right?
Yeah, it can be done in a precinct, and actually, I'm exaggerating a little. It's 200. It's 200 apartments for this particular system. So we've got we're in the process of developing a smaller system as well that could go into units below. But yeah, we are trialing it currently in a couple of precincts. And one of those successful precincts has actually been at Fraser Properties. So they actually were one of the first, one of the pioneers of trialing this system in Australia, and now are actually looking to roll this out as part of their new apartment complex buildings. And because part of the challenge is who's going to pay for it. And we've been really fortunate, certainly in the City of Melbourne context, that the City of Melbourne has subsidised the costs during the trials. But because the residents are so enthusiastic, and these are rental units, so they're not capital purchases. Well, not in this case anyway. And so the body corporates are already looking to be able to raise the funds and make that economically viable across the apartment complex to be able to continue to run with this program.
That's really pleasing.
Yeah, and I guess the other part of it is just, and I'm not sure exactly what it means in the context of Perth and Brisbane, but certainly in Melbourne and Sydney, municipalities are looking to introduce, there'll be levies that have to be paid eventually by apartment buildings for waste removal. So I guess there's a few, early adopters that are looking to kind of, I guess, find a solution early before those levies get introduced. And in Melbourne, they'll be introduced in 2025.
Yeah, right. So it's not far away. Yeah,
it's not far away. So every large apartment complex is going to be looking for some sort of solution.
Cost. Yeah, unless they get a solution. Yeah, good.
Yeah, and I guess part of the process is not only is there, and in terms of what Eco Guardians provides as part of this, it's not only that, so the waste from the residents goes into the unit. We provide, education around how you separate food waste, and and there is the provision of the caddies, compostable bags. We go in and run sessions for the body corporate to ensure that they understand how to use it, and then to support them in their success of getting other residents to have the uptake. And we're also conscious that there's all sorts of people that live in these communities, and some who don't have English as their first language, or so there's we're working to support that cohort of residents as well, and tenants, to make sure that they understand how to use it going forward. Then we do also have collection. So we collect the output as part of this. And then in terms of the, so in the City of Melbourne scenario, we're bagging up the fertilizer and taking it back to the residents so that they can use it on, they've got, in that scenario, they've got beautiful gardens, they've got a community vegetable garden as well, and, and they can use it on their indoor plants. So it's a general all-purpose fertilizer. So we're bagging it up and enabling them to sort of to be able to use that on site.
Close the circle, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I did have primed here that I sent you a bit late.
No,
it's a terrific video, and maybe you can send that out. Yeah, because I think it really shows, kind of encapsulate really beautifully the whole system, and in a 2-minute video speaks to it probably much better than I have done tonight. But I think it will give your members a really good sort of understanding of the simplicity of use. But again, there needs to be support from body corporates to introduce it. But I think, and this will be one solution, but it's, we certainly see it as a pretty good solution. And we've had a huge amount of interest Australia-wide. We've had a lot of approaches. So we're really encouraged by the, how the community is thinking generally about food waste, and, and hoping that we can really support the uptake of solutions across Australia.
I agree. And I think it's awesome to see that, what has typically been for more of a household standalone kind of service, you're now bringing into the apartment kind of like complex. And I think, there's going to be some people who do want to do it, and there's going to be some people who don't. But I think at the end of the day, to be able to rent those machinery rather than do the capital purchase.
That's right.
And I think when you've got that incentive, which is not paying the levies or the additional fees, there's those that are proactive and they get ahead of the game, and then the rest kind of like come kicking and dragging behind them. So.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess, and one of the challenges, I guess, out to the property developers is just, it's much easier to spec these solutions in as you're building and developing, as trying to retrofit them.
Yes.
So that's what we're certainly encouraging as well. And whether it's our solution or others, that should be really factored into the overall development of just apartment complexes going forward in general.
Yes.
And I guess, and I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to the positive impact that this is having, and what this means in terms of reductions to greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 emissions in particular. And this is just some sort of gives you a bit of an example of, if we were to run, so we have, as I said, large units that aren't necessarily the apartment units, but we can process up to 2,000 kilos of food waste in one process. And this just gives you a bit of a sense of how we're having a positive impact on the environment. So all of that, what that means, 258 more cars off the road, huge reductions in just energy that homes are using. So there's lots of environmental benefits to this, and lots of the innovation that's happening in our space at the moment.
I agree, and I think for such a long time, Helen, everyone's been talking about LED lights. They've been talking about solar panels, electric vehicle charging units. This has all been the focus. A bit of water, but it's great to see that food element's coming in to that mix, because it is a complete package, and it's great that the City of Melbourne did provide you with this grant to kind of do the trial. because that demonstrates that they're trying to show leadership at the same time as obviously introducing these levies. So they're being proactive in that education space.
They are, and I guess the benefits to them are many, including now that they get this delicious fertilizer that they can use. And just back to one of your points, there has been a huge amount of focus on green energy. And that's just one part of a huge complex puzzle that we need to solve really, really quickly.
Yeah, I agree. And it takes many people in that space. And when we saw what you were doing, we thought it was great, which is why we obviously wanted to give you an opportunity to do this Zoom event. So if people are wanting to know more information, these are your contact details here that they can reach you on, Helen?
Yeah, they go to our website and they can just contact me at helen.steele@ecoguardians.com.au. And we very much approach this as with sort of a collaboration hat, our collaborative hats on. So if anyone would like to talk to us about collaborating on developing a solution for them, we'd be absolutely open to that. And we're in conversations all the time with the large waste management producers, the Veolias, the Cleanaways, and the Suez of the world, because organic waste is a huge challenge for them, and your members may not realize, but even the composting solutions that are being developed as part of FOGO, there are some challenges associated with that as well, because a lot of that compost is very contaminated, and actually can't be used. Like, it's a very low value product that's created. So if we can kind of refine even what comes out of composting, and there's a lot more in terms of waste stream there, and divert that from landfill, which most of that is going to landfill or for use on farms. But it sort of worries me that there's a huge amount of contamination in that process as well. So I think with some very innovative thinking and some collaborative partnerships, I think we can come up with some better solutions.
And you're thinking about working with commercial organisations and I guess shopping centres and those kinds of things. But I guess if you've got 200 homes in one building, that the economies of scale is much better than actually having a rubbish truck having to go to 200 homes, right? To collect the green waste.
Absolutely. And I don't know what the bin rooms in many of your member apartment complexes look like. I would have to say that the City of Melbourne Spring Street complex is an exemplar. It's the cleanest bin room I've ever seen. But they also recycle everything from electronic waste to clothing. But what we're seeing, because the other great thing with our system is they'll now be able to take away a couple of their bins because of the diversion. So 40% of their general waste now is being diverted into our system. So that will mean less bins in the bin room. So just from a congestion perspective, and they were saying to me, because of all the different the different ways that they sort waste, the number of trucks that have to come in every day to collect it, they said it's just getting a little bit crazy. So yeah, congestion is a real issue for many apartment complexes as well.
That's an interesting point. You wouldn't have probably thought of that initially when thinking about your system. So that's just an extra bonus. And you're right, the contamination levels of the bins with the FOGO system, and ultimately, even though you're kind of doing this extra bin, you're doing this extra processing treatment service. If it's contaminated, it's contaminated. It still goes to landfill, right? So
that's right.
Yeah. So the fact that your compost is usable and you're able to actually, detect quite quickly, because I guess your system can actually quite quickly see if there's something non-food orientated in that mix.
And I guess just an extension to this conversation. So we were very fortunate to receive a grant also from Sustainability Victoria. We're Melbourne, we are Victorian based, although we've got our systems all across Australia, so we have to think about national solutions. But we're fortunate to receive a grant from Sustainability Victoria to build the first of what would be a number of fertilizer refinement plants. So we're going to have the capacity to collect the output that can't be used, bring it back to a location where we can remove further contaminants. And when we talk about contaminants in our system, it's predominantly the compostable bags, which
Yes.
which do break down, but we can remove them and break them down further into tiny little pieces. And then, also those other bits and pieces that can't be broken down, as I said, avocado pips and corn husks and things. I mean, we do get cutlery in our system. When you're scraping your plate waste or you're cutting up your vegetables,
teenagers.
lots of paring knives go through. Fortunately, because there isn't a blade in our unit, it doesn't generally we haven't had any issues with anything getting stuck in there and upsetting the system. But yeah, so we'll be able to remove those additional contaminants and actually produce 100% organic fertilizer from food waste that we're actually going to take and sell in a commercial context. So that's going to be exciting to be able to make sure that we use all of that output and further prevent that from going to landfill.
Yeah, great. All right, so I'm just going to ask our guests if there's any questions. There's only a small number in the room today. I had one the other day where there's 100 people, so I had muted everybody. So if you have any questions,
I must be a rock star.
Yeah, surely. I wish I was a rock star. I'd be making a lot more money. Helen and I are both used to working on a smell of an oily rag to make things happen.
We certainly are. It's all smoke and mirrors.
But I'm really pleased for you, Helen, with regards to that grant to actually get that processing plant.
Yeah.
And hard yards do pay off in the end, don't they, darling? Just when you think that maybe it's not going to come to fruition, voila, it does. So it's great to have you in the space, and certainly we're very grateful to our sponsors. That's how we're able to do what we do, and obviously having this event today with Helen, which we thought was very important, and hence why we initiated that. So thank you again today, Helen, for your company. Is there any last words of wisdom that you would like to give our audience?
No, but I was just looking at your list of supporters there, and I certainly encourage them. I saw Hutchie's there,
yes,
and a couple of other large building companies. And if not reaching out to somebody like us, I would certainly encourage them to be really thinking about, having that waste solution developed as part of all of their construction going forward. So yeah. I put that challenge out to them and that call to action.
Well, Chris Stevenson from Hutchie's always tends to watch our programs, Helen. So
well, I expect a call from him.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming along today and for being part of our session talking about recycling food waste. Great to have you with us, Helen. I'm glad we worked out those difficulties with the technology.
Yeah, me too. And take care, everybody.
You too, and we'll be sending this out to everybody through our e-news. Thanks
Helen. Very much. Bye.
Take care. Bye now. Thanks.
No worries.